Chapter 10. We only learned later the real motives behind the changes. It turned out that the rashes were to be videoed and then distributed, making ridiculous profits around the country. The road rashes were becoming bigger and bigger business by the race. Illegal broadcasting of the races opened up whole new avenues of off-course betting, so it was all done for money. The Road Rash organisation was beginning to choke on its own greed. They no longer seemed to care for the well-being of the riders. They wanted fast, bloodthirsty races to drag in yet more money. The more wipeouts, the worse the rider's injury, the more attention they could grab. These first couple of series, my first 10 races in retrospect, could be seen as the end of an era. From this point on, the warm camaraderie between the riders grew cool. Hammer, Gunther, Grubb, Sid and Rude Boy were the 5 riders that had decided to call it a day. Look, I can't explain it, said a thoughtful Sid, but it just doesn't feel right anymore. This whole thing isn't done for fun. It isn't like it used to be. Sid paused, Lester raised his eyebrows. Sid continued, yeah, okay, we all knew that the organisation was taking a decent profit out of all of it, but we did it just for the kicks. There was an irrelevant chuckle at the unintended pun. Look, I really don't think it's a laughing matter, he continued. The organisation, they're getting greedier and greedier, and they won't be happy until all of us mugs are spread evenly along the concrete. Maybe I'm just a coward, but longer courses will inevitably lead to bigger and bigger bikes, and more powerful bikes mean trouble, take my word for it. It seemed that the other 4 riders agreed with him. We were sorry to see them go, and I don't think there were any of us who didn't doubt our own sense in staying. But replacement for the 5 was soon found, and we were told to carry on business as usual. Enter Broomhelga, Butch, Angel, a heartbreakingly vicious woman who completely failed to do any justice to her name, Hoghide, and the long-awaited Akira, Shiva's cousin. They kept themselves to themselves and they raced hard. What little we were able to get out of them pointed to the conclusion that they'd been attracted to the sport by the lure of yet more and more cash. Prize money had been doubled. The winning of a rash would receive $1,500, not bad for a 10-minute suicide dash. As I mentioned before, the race length was increased to roughly 7.5 miles. The extra distance found by merely pushing the finish mark back a couple of miles from the original position. But the most significant change concerned the bikes. It seemed that Sid had been right. The restrictions on the types of bikes that were allowed to enter the rashes were relaxed. Previously, it had been decided that each rider should ride the same size and classifications of a bike. This way, the success of a rider came down entirely to his or her own skill and ability. It had kept races fair, and the smaller power bikes couldn't really do anyone that much damage. Sure, they were fast, but they were also reliable and controllable. If you wiped out, it was your own fault. There was no way you could blame the Shuriken 400 for not making it round a bend. You could only blame your own lack of judgment. And if you did come off, then the chances were that you'd be able to get straight back on your bike and carry on racing. But deregulation meant that before too long we'd have to be racing monster, uncontrollable bikes if we wanted to win. The organisation reached a compromise. They would set a new standard bike. In due course, everyone was kitted out of a spanking new Kamikaze 750. Of course, being the slimy, manipulative schemer that I was, I struck a deal with the organisers. There were a couple of new guys running the show, and I persuaded them to take a gamble on my abilities. I said that I would forsake my guarantee of a Kamikaze and would stick with my Shuriken 400, on the understanding that I would be allowed to buy whatever bike I wanted with whatever winnings I might earn. If I didn't win, well then, I guess I'd just lost myself an expensive gamble, but if I won, I'd be laughing. Amazingly, they agreed, on the strict understanding that I could only use my winnings to buy a new bike, and whatever I could get back on the sale of my old bike, of course. They allowed me my wishes. I guess they were trying to keep me sweet. They'd lost enough riders as it was. As I said before, the 10 of us original rashers who remained had been fairly confident that we were doing the right thing. So the bikes were now a bit faster, the courses were longer, and there was some new opposition. Big deal. Everything changed, didn't it? But then there was still a lingering doubt that Sid, Hammer and the rest had got out while there was still time. Had got out while the getting was good. Oh yes, there was one more change. From that day on, all our earnings, placings and race records were kept on computer. After every race, each of us was given a plastic card with his details electronically printed on. These were just confirmation slips for our own personal records in case we ever questioned the computer's huge readout of race statistics at the end of each series of 5 races. Of course, I kept all my cars, souvenirs I guess. You can borrow them if you want, you never know, they might come in useful one day, and I don't need them anymore. They form a pretty sick diary of the injuries, death and greed that were to shape to form the next couple of years. Chapter 11. It had been a long, tough series. We'd raced all 5 courses again and I'd managed to keep a fairly clean sheet. I hadn't been busted and I'd taken on a couple of falls, but not all of the rashers were handling the hotter pace as well as I was. A couple of the new guys had been chewing on a serious amount of concrete. Everyone had been kitted out with new levers, colour coordinated to match the new bikes, but it still hurt if you came off. The new riders didn't talk much. As I said before, the atmosphere had sobered. Akira had set the tone. He'd made it clear that he was here for the money and the money alone. This attitude was reinforced by the other new riders. They didn't seem to share the same love for the actual sport itself. A love that was a large part of the motivating force for me, Slater, Natasha and the rest of the original lineup. Slater still took jumps like a stuntman and he never seemed down, always with the same mischievous sneer on his face. But you got the feeling that maybe even he was making an effort, desperately trying to pretend that nothing had changed. Maybe we were just getting paranoid, or maybe even just feeling old. Don't you ever think that maybe worrying about your age is a self-fulfilling prophecy? I mean, you only worry about your age when you're old, by which time there's no point worrying at all. But either way, you were sure that the courses were getting more dangerous. There seemed to be just a few more rocks, the old cow beginning to stray onto the road, and maybe a few more cars. I mean, we could have been forgiven for thinking that maybe we were being set up. Maybe this was all part of the organisers' plan to up the thrill and spill factor. But we dismissed these thoughts. They got the longer races and they got their bigger bikes. That was surely enough to keep their bloodlust happy. So at the time we figured that, no, we were just getting paranoid. Yeah, looking back, we should have realised that the wind was beginning to change and that it would only get colder. We were just like pawns in a big business game of high-speed chess. Even the cops had noticed a change. Most of them didn't care about the rashers, but I really like to think that O'Leary was genuinely concerned. He'd been in the camp before one of the races and pleaded with me. "Please don't drive so fast," he said. "The side is getting upset with you people." I guess it was his way of warning us. There'd been talk of getting in some new cops to deal with us, but so far none has shown up. Natasha and I talked a lot, and she had told me that O'Leary had been worried for her also. "Does your mother know where you are?" he inquired of a dazed, sprawling Natasha. She'd just made a serious dent in a telegraph pole while cruising at 150 miles an hour at an altitude of approximately 15 feet, so really I can't repeat her reply. It was a bit rude. Tough girl, Natasha, but O'Leary's sentiments were sincere. But anyway, as I said, I had a good season. I'd won 3 races, a Road Rash record. The Sierra Nevada had been a doddle. I'd raced there twice before, so I knew the course pretty well. Okay, so the extra couple of miles at the end was just fresh turf, but we were all in the same boat. I'd just had the lucky breaks towards the end of the race. The Pacific Coast hadn't been so easy. I was learning to surf the concrete rollers as well as anyone else, but I was finding it more and more difficult to restrain myself when it came to violence. The new guys didn't care. They'd swing at anything, and unfortunately, when they weren't bailing out, they tended to be the fastest riders. So up among the leaders at the end of the race, things tend to get a bit heated, shall we say. But I kept to my personal rule. I only hit people who hit me. And then there was Grass Valley, another easy victory. Couple this with a couple of respectable seconds, one of which was a whisker away from being a first. I swear I lost to Akira by a quiff, and then I had an unbelievable successful season. I had over $10,000 in the bank, and I was up there with the likes of Shiva and Akira as the favourites. You want to know the secret of my success? Well, if you were anyone else, I'd tell you that it was down to skill, natural talent and determination. But I'll be honest, my little gamble with the organisation had paid off. You know the one about being able to buy my own bike if I won enough? Well, I had a couple of lucky breaks at the start of the series and I'd been able to put my money where my mouth was. Now, I didn't take the obvious option and buy the most expensive bike I could afford. I asked around, looked at what was on offer, agreed to a couple of test drives and took some good advice. While the rest of the rashers were racing Kamikaze 750s, I pumped for the Banzai 750. $1,000 cheaper than the Kamikaze, but I knew what I was doing. Now to start off with, the other guys had laughed. Natasha, of all people, kept making sarcastic comments about my scooter. But what they didn't realise is that you can only take these roads so fast. They should have learned from spending so much race hours on a Shuriken 400 that crisp handling is the most important quality to look for in a bike, and that's what I got in my Banzai. The Kamikaze oozed raw power. I mean, you only had to look at the ugly brute of a bike too long and you break out into a sweat. Slater said he could only actually steel himself into getting on his with his eyes closed, but by contrast, my light bike was a beauty. I may have been slow off the grid, and if I had to plough on the anchors, then I waited precious seconds getting back up to revs. But while at top speed, no one could touch me. I went around corners as if they weren't there. Slater did the same thing once, except that the corner was there, and it was just that he'd done his eyes still shut from getting on at the start. Take a piece of advice from me. If you ever get the choice of a Banzai or a Kamikaze, take a couple of seconds out from reality and flex the old grey matter and think about how they got their names. Never mind, I'll spell it out for you. Just buy the Banzai, okay? It was after this, the first 5 series of races on the bigger bikes, that we heard the news. The bikes were to get bigger and the races longer. Again. 5 more riders called it quits. We waved goodbye to Broomhelga, Rex, Axel, Lester and Shiva. But the organisation wasn't worried. They bargained on a few cowards, as they were branded, losing their bottle, and had already hired some replacements. Otis, Spike, Zippy, Chip, and a guy called Sergio entered our Coliseum. Natasha rode up to me as soon as she heard the news. Yeah, we were going to stick together as best we could, but there was a new harder series of 5 races to contend with, and things were only going to get still tougher, but we figured we could look after each other. I knew I could count on Slater and Natasha, and out on the open road, 2 friends are a lot.